Welcome to Dr. Harmony, the place where we uncover the most gripping stories of betrayal, hidden truths, and the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. Today's story is a chilling reminder that the person you share a bed with might be the very person plotting your downfall, and that family isn't always defined by blood, but by greed. We are diving deep into a tale of a woman who was pushed to her breaking point, only to rise from the ashes in a way no one saw coming. If you believe that justice should always prevail, you are in the right place. Stay tuned until the very end, because the way this story unfolds will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty. Let's begin this journey of secrets and shadows right now. The rain lashed against the windshield of the sleek, black sedan parked at the end of the driveway, but Elena didn't move. She stared at the wrought iron gates of the mansion she once called a prison. It had been 5 years. 5 years since she walked out of that front door with nothing but a bruised ego and a small suitcase, followed by the mocking laughter of the people who were supposed to be her family. At 30 years old, she had entered that house as a bride, full of hope and a naive belief that love could bridge the gap between her humble beginnings and the staggering wealth of the Sterling family. But the Sterlings didn't want a daughter-in-law. They wanted a scapegoat, a servant with a wedding ring, and a target for their refined cruelty. The memory of her departure was still a jagged shard in her mind. Her husband, Julian, hadn't even looked up from his cognac when his mother, Beatrice, told Elena she was a stain on the family tapestry that needed to be bleached away. They had accused her of theft, of infidelity, of being a gold digger, all lies meticulously crafted to ensure she left with nothing, not a penny of the marital assets, not a shred of dignity. They had forced her to sign a series of documents under duress, laughing as she wept. Julian's silence had been the sharpest blade of all. He had stood by and watched his sisters, Clara and Sophia, toss her belongings into the mud, calling her a low-class interloper who was lucky to have even breathed the same air as them for 3 years. But the woman sitting in the car today was not that broken girl. The Elena of today wore a suit that cost more than Clara's entire seasonal wardrobe and carried a legal folder that contained the power to dismantle the Sterling Empire brick by brick. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking firmly on the pavement, a stark contrast to the way she used to tiptoe through the hallways of that house, afraid to wake the monsters. As she approached the grand entrance, the security cameras swiveled to follow her. She didn't hide her face. She wanted them to see. She wanted the notification to pop up on Julian's phone, to disrupt whatever hollow, expensive life he was currently leading. She reached the door and didn't knock. She used the key she had never returned, the one they thought she had lost in the mud. The heavy oak door groaned as it swung open, revealing the cavernous foyer that still smelled of expensive lilies and old, rotting secrets. The house was quiet, but it was the silence of a predator waiting in the grass. From the top of the grand staircase, a voice drifted down, cold and sharp enough to cut glass. It was Beatrice. "I told the help we weren't expecting any deliveries today. Leave whatever it is at the gate and get out." Elena stepped into the light of the chandelier, her eyes meeting the older woman's. Beatrice froze, her hand tightening on the marble railing. The color drained from her face, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear before her mask of arrogance slammed back into place. "You!" she hissed, the word dripping with venom. "How dare you set foot in this house? I believe we made it very clear 5 years ago that trash belongs in the gutter, not in our hallway." "Guards! Where are the guards?" "The guards are busy reviewing the new ownership papers for the perimeter of this estate, Beatrice," Elena said, her voice calm, melodic, and terrifyingly steady. "And I'm not here as a guest. I'm here as a creditor." At that moment, Julian emerged from the study, looking older, his face bloated from years of excess. He stopped dead when he saw her. "Elena?" he whispered, a strange mix of guilt and recognition crossing his features. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just barge in here. We had an agreement." "An agreement based on fraud is no agreement at all, Julian," Elena replied, opening the folder. She pulled out a document that had been stamped by the High Court only 48 hours prior. "I'm not here for a reunion. I'm here to serve you with the final, irrevocable decree of our divorce and a notice of total asset reclamation." You see, while you were all busy spending money you thought you'd stolen from my father's hidden trusts, I was busy proving exactly how you did it. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavy with the realization that the pitiful girl they had discarded was now the person holding the leash. Clara and Sophia appeared at the balcony above, their faces twisted in confusion and budding rage. They began to shout, hurling the same insults they had used years ago, but Elena didn't even flinch. She just looked at Julian, the man she had once loved, and felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of a trap finally snapping shut. Julian's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray as he looked at the documents in Elena's hand. He tried to laugh, a dry, hacking sound that lacked any of his former bravado. Asset reclamation? Elena, you're delusional. My father built this empire. You came from a family of school teachers and failed shopkeepers. You don't have the standing to reclaim a single brick of this house. He took a step toward her, attempting to use his height to intimidate her, just as he had done 1,000 times before during their marriage. But Elena didn't retreat. She stood her ground, her gaze fixed on him with a chilling intensity that made him stop in his tracks. "That's where you're wrong, Julian," Elena said, her voice echoing in the marble foyer. "You were so blinded by your own arrogance that you never bothered to look into my mother's side of the family. You saw a quiet girl and assumed she was a nobody. You thought my father's struggle was due to poverty, when in reality it was due to a legal battle against the very company your father used to jumpstart the Sterling Group. Your family didn't just build an empire. They liquidated mine through a series of shell companies and forged signatures. And 5 years ago, when you threw me out, you inadvertently gave me the freedom to find the paper trail you thought was buried forever." Beatrice descended the stairs, her silk robe billowing behind her like the wings of a predatory bird. "Lies, all of it. This is a desperate attempt by a scorned woman to claw her way back into a life she doesn't deserve. I personally saw the contracts your father signed. He sold those rights willingly." She turned to Julian, her eyes flashing. "Call the police, Julian. Tell them a trespasser is making threats. I want her dragged out of here in handcuffs this time." Elena simply pulled her phone from her pocket and pressed a button. A voice began to play through the house's integrated Bluetooth speakers, a feature she had helped install years ago, which they had never bothered to update. It was Beatrice's voice, clear and sharp, recorded 3 years prior during a private dinner. "It was so easy, Julian. We just had to wait for her father to get sick. The girl was too distracted by his hospital bills to notice we were moving the capital. By the time she realizes the Sterling Group owns her family's legacy, she'll be on the street and we'll be billionaires twice over." The silence that followed the recording was deafening. Clara and Sophia, who had been sneering from the balcony, were now whispering frantically to each other. The low-class interloper they had mocked now possessed a digital record of their mother's confession. Beatrice's hand trembled on the banister. That is a fabrication, AI manipulation. It won't hold up in court." "It already did, Beatrice," Elena countered. "That recording was authenticated months ago. But that's not why I'm here. I didn't come here to watch you squirm, though I must admit, it's a pleasant bonus. I'm here because the divorce papers you forced me to sign 5 years ago contained a very specific clause, a clause that Sophia herself insisted on adding to protect the family. It stated that if any party were found guilty of concealing assets during the marriage, the entire estate, including this house, would revert to the other spouse in its entirety. You were so greedy to keep me from getting a few $1,000s that you signed over the entire kingdom without realizing I was the one holding the keys." Julian lunged for the folder in her hand, his eyes wild with a mixture of desperation and fury. Elena stepped aside with practiced grace, and a man in a dark suit stepped through the open front door, blocking Julian's path. He was tall, built like a mountain, and carried a badge of the High Court. Behind him, 2 more men in official uniforms followed. "Mr. Sterling, please step back," the official said firmly. "We are here to oversee the execution of the court-ordered eviction and the transfer of property titles." "Eviction?" Clara shrieked from above. "This is our house. You can't evict the owners." "According to the latest filings, Miss Clara, you are no longer the owners," the official replied, glancing at a tablet. "This property, The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and the controlling shares of Sterling Logistics have been legally transferred to Elena Vance as of 9 a.m. this morning. You have exactly 2 hours to gather your personal belongings. Anything left behind becomes the property of the new owner. Elena watched as the realization finally shattered their masks. The power dynamic that had defined her life for a decade had flipped in a single heartbeat. She walked past Julian toward the grand staircase, her eyes trailing over the expensive paintings and the gold leaf molding. I remember when you told me I wasn't allowed to sit in the library because my presence cheapened the room, Julian. I think I'll make the library my new office. It has the best view of the gate I'll be watching you walk through in 2 hours. Beatrice lunged at Elena, her fingernails clawing at the air, but the officers quickly restrained her. You won't get away with this. We have lawyers. We have connections. Your connections were built on your wealth, Beatrice, Elena said softly, leaning in close so only the older woman could hear. And since I own your bank accounts now, I suspect you'll find those friends are suddenly very busy. You taught me that the world is a cruel place for those without power. I just decided to take yours. As the officers began to escort the hysterical Sterling family members toward their respective rooms to pack, Elena turned back to the foyer. The house felt different now. It no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a monument to the girl she used to be, and a playground for the woman she had become. But the hardest part was yet to come. She didn't just want their money. She wanted them to feel the same crushing weight of betrayal they had forced upon her. And she had a special plan for Julian, the man who had promised to protect her, then stood by while his family tore her soul apart. Julian stood paralyzed in the center of the foyer, his world collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. He watched his sisters being escorted upstairs by the court officers, their screams of indignation echoing through the halls. For years, he had operated under the assumption that Elena was a ghost, a discarded memory that would never haunt him again. He had underestimated her heart, her intellect, and most importantly, her patience. He looked at her now, and for the first time, he saw the predator he had inadvertently created. Elena, please, Julian started, his voice cracking. We can talk about this. There's no need for this public spectacle. If it's money you want, we can reach an out-of-court settlement. I'll make sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life. Just tell these people to leave. Elena let out a short, sharp laugh that held no warmth. Taken care of? Like you took care of me when your sisters threw my mother's wedding ring into the garbage disposal? Or when you watched your mother forge my signature on the waiver for my father's medical trust? You had your chance to take care of me, Julian. You had 3 years of marriage to show an ounce of backbone, and you failed every single day. She walked toward the small side table where a crystal decanter of Julian's favorite whiskey sat. She picked it up, swirled the amber liquid, and then poured it slowly onto the expensive Persian rug. Julian gasped, as if the liquid were his own blood. That rug is a 16th century antique, he stammered. It's my rug now, Julian. And I've always hated the color, Elena said, setting the empty decanter down with a click. She turned her attention back to the legal folder. Let's talk about the settlement you mentioned. I'm not here for a payout. I already have the money. What I'm here for is the truth. You see, I spent the last 5 years working as a forensic accountant for the very firm that handled your family's offshore transitions. It's funny how a name change and a little bit of plastic surgery can hide a person from people who never really looked at her face to begin with. Julian's eyes widened. You were working for Miller & Associates? That was you? The anonymous whistleblower who triggered the federal audit? I prefer the term consultant, Elena replied with a chilling smile. I didn't just find the money you stole from me. I found the money you stole from the government, from your shareholders, and even from each other. Did you know, Julian, that while you were busy playing the loyal son, Beatrice was funneling millions from your personal trust into a private account in Switzerland? She was preparing to cut you out of the will the moment your father passed away. Julian turned to look at his mother, who was being led down the stairs by an officer, clutching a small designer suitcase. Beatrice froze, her eyes darting between her son and Elena. She's lying, Julian. Don't listen to her. She's trying to turn us against each other. Am I? Elena pulled out a ledger sheet. Check the transaction ID ending in 4492, Julian. It's dated the day after our wedding. Your mother moved half of your inheritance into an account listed under her maiden name. She didn't want a low-class girl getting the money, but she didn't want you having it either. She thinks you're weak, Julian, and to be honest, she's right. The discord Elena had planted began to bloom instantly. Julian's grief turned into a white-hot rage, but it wasn't directed at Elena, it was directed at the woman who had controlled him his entire life. He stepped toward Beatrice, his fists clenched. Is it true? Did you steal from me while you were lecturing me about family loyalty? I was protecting the legacy, Beatrice shrieked, her poise finally shattering. You would have spent it on that girl. I did what was necessary. The scene was pure chaos. The prestigious Sterling family was now a pack of wolves turning on their own. Elena watched from the sidelines, her expression one of calm detachment. This was the drama they had lived by, and now it would be the drama they died by, socially and financially. Clara and Sophia ran down the stairs, carrying armfuls of designer clothes, only to be stopped by the officers. Those items were purchased with corporate funds after the date of the injunction, the officer stated, beginning to strip the expensive furs and handbags from their arms. Only personal items owned prior to the marriage or gifts with proven receipts are allowed. Please leave the luxury goods on the floor. This is assault, Clara screamed, her voice hitting a frequency that made Elena wince. Elena, you monster! We gave you everything! We gave you a name! You gave me a target, Elena corrected her, and you gave me a reason to never be a victim again. As the clock ticked toward the 2-hour mark, the grand foyer of the Sterling mansion looked like a battlefield of discarded vanity. Piles of silk, leather, and gold lay scattered on the floor, stripped from the family that had used them as armor. Elena walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the cold, damp air rush in. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained a bruised purple, matching the mood of the fallen giants. Time is up, the lead officer announced. One by one, the Sterlings were ushered toward the exit. Beatrice went first, her head held high in a desperate attempt to maintain her pride, though she was wearing only a simple cotton slip and a pair of house slippers. Clara and Sophia followed, sobbing and hurling curses that Elena ignored. Finally, it was Julian's turn. He stopped at the threshold, looking back at the woman he had once sworn to cherish. Where am I supposed to go, Elena? He asked, his voice a hollow shell of its former self. I have nothing. You've taken everything. You have exactly what you gave me 5 years ago, Julian, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You have the clothes on your back and the mud on your shoes. I'd suggest you start walking. I hear the bus stop at the end of the road still has a bench. If you're lucky, it might even be dry. She didn't wait for him to respond. She closed the door, the heavy thud of the oak sounding like a final gavel strike. She was alone in the mansion, surrounded by the ghosts of her past. But for the first time in 35 years, Elena Vance was truly free. But she knew that taking the house was just the beginning. The Sterlings had friends in high places, and a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. She had to ensure they stayed down. Elena stood in the center of the silent foyer, the echoes of the Sterling's screams still vibrating in the air. For the first time in 5 years, the suffocating pressure in her chest had eased, replaced by a cold, analytical clarity. She knew that in the world of the elite, an eviction was just a temporary setback unless she severed their lifelines completely. The Sterlings weren't just a family, they were a brand, and brands could be tarnished beyond repair. She walked into Julian's private study, a room she had been forbidden to enter during her marriage. It was a masculine sanctuary of dark mahogany, leather-bound books that were never read, and a safe hidden behind a mediocre oil painting of a hunt. Elena didn't need to guess the combination. She had watched Julian enter it through a hidden camera she'd installed months ago during a maintenance visit she had orchestrated under a pseudonym. With a few clicks, the heavy door swung open. Inside weren't just stacks of emergency cash and jewelry, but the true skeletons of the Sterling Group. She pulled out a black ledger, the real one. This book contained the names of the politicians, judges, and developers who had been on the Sterling payroll for decades. This was the insurance policy Beatrice had used to keep the family untouchable. "Checkmate," Elena whispered to the empty room. She sat at Julian's desk, feeling the weight of the power shift. She pulled out her laptop and began the second phase of her plan. Taking the house was about dignity. Taking their reputation was about justice. She began uploading encrypted files to a secure server addressed to the city's leading investigative journalists. These files didn't just show the fraud committed against her father. They showed the systematic bribery that had allowed the Sterling Group to bypass safety regulations on their low-income housing projects, projects that had resulted in a fire 2 years ago that the family had successfully hushed up. As the upload bar crawled toward 100%, her phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. She answered, her voice cool and steady. "I expected you to call sooner, Julian. You think you've won?" Julian's voice was distorted, the sound of wind and traffic in the background. He was likely at the bus stop she had mocked. "My mother is already calling the board of directors. By tomorrow morning, your legal takeover will be tied up in litigation for the next 20 years. You'll be penniless trying to fight our lawyers. Give it up, Elena. Give us the house back, and I'll make sure the family drops the trespassing charges." The board of directors? Elena leaned back in the leather chair, a smirk playing on her lips. "Julian, did you really think I'd leave them out of this? While you were walking to the gate, I sent out a mass resignation of the executive team. I bought out their contracts 3 weeks ago. They don't work for the Sterling Group anymore. They work for Vance Holdings. Your mother is calling a deadline." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Elena could almost hear Julian's brain trying to compute a reality where the Sterling name held no currency. "Vance Holdings?" he finally managed to say. "Since when do you have a holding company?" "Since I realized that to kill a monster, you have to become a bigger one," Elena replied. "I spent 5 years living in a studio apartment above a laundromat, Julian. I saved every penny of my salary as a forensic accountant and invested it in the very sectors your family neglected. I shorted your stock when I knew the audit was coming. I made my fortune by betting on your failure. And it was the easiest bet I've ever made. Elena, listen to me." Julian's tone shifted. He was trying his charming voice now, the one he used when he wanted her to forgive him for coming home late smelling of another woman's perfume. "We were happy once. We can be happy again. This is just a misunderstanding. My mother forced my hand. I always loved you. I can help you run the company. Together, we'd be unstoppable." Elena felt a surge of genuine disgust. The man was a parasite, looking for a new host the moment the old one died. "You didn't love me, Julian. You loved having a trophy that didn't talk back. You loved having someone to blame when your life felt empty. Don't ever use that word with me again." She hung up and blocked the number. She had no more words for him. She had work to do. The front door opened again, and a woman in a sharp gray suit entered. It was Maya, Elena's lead counsel, and the only person who knew the full extent of the plan. Maya looked around the opulent foyer and whistled. "A bit gaudy for my taste, but the square footage is impressive. How are they taking it? Beatrice tried to claw my eyes out, and Julian is currently trying to seduce me over the phone," Elena said, moving toward the window to watch a news van pull up to the front gates. "Classic," Maya laughed, pulling a tablet from her bag. "Well, the news of the bribery scandal just broke on the wires. The Sterling Group's stock is in a free fall. It's lost 40% of its value in the last 20 minutes. By the time the markets close, the company will be worth less than the paper the stock is printed on." Elena watched the journalists through the window. She saw the flashbulbs of the cameras as they tried to peek through the wrought iron bars. Tomorrow, the world would see the Sterlings for what they were: frauds, thieves, and bullies. "What's next?" Maya asked, looking at her friend with admiration. Elena turned away from the window, her eyes reflecting the cold light of the study. "Next, we go to the hospital. My father's old partner is still there, and he has the original deeds to the land the Sterlings stole. It's time to return what's left to the people they stepped on to get here. But first..." She paused, looking at the painting of the hunt. "I want this house emptied. Not just the Sterlings, the furniture, the rugs, the art. I want it stripped to the bare walls. I want them to see that without their stolen things, this place is just a hollow shell, just like they are. But as Elena prepared to leave, she noticed a small, inconspicuous envelope tucked into the back of the safe. It wasn't a bank statement or a deed. It was a handwritten letter with a seal she didn't recognize. She opened it, and her blood ran cold. The drama was far from over. The Sterlings had a secret benefactor, someone far more powerful than Beatrice, and they were already on their way to the house. The letter in Elena's hand was thick, the parchment high grade, and the seal was a coat of arms she had only seen in history books and elite financial journals, the crest of the Moretti family. They were the shadowy architects of the European banking world, a dynasty that made the Sterlings look like street vendors. The letter was addressed to Beatrice, dated only 2 days ago. It read, "The debt is called. If the girl discovers the nexus, the protection ends. Secure the files or the Sterling name will be erased before the sun sets on Tuesday." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. The nexus. She looked back at the black ledger she had pulled from the safe. She had assumed it was just a list of local bribes, but as she flipped through the back pages, she realized she had missed something vital. There were coordinates, shipping manifests for medical supplies that were being routed through Sterling Logistics' private docks, and a series of payments to a facility in the Swiss Alps that didn't exist on any map. "Maya, we have a problem," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave. She showed her lawyer the letter. Maya's face went pale. "The Morettis? Elena, if the Sterlings are tied to them, this isn't just a corporate takeover anymore. This is a death sentence. We need to leave. Now. If they think you have the Nexus files, they won't send lawyers. They'll send cleaners." But Elena didn't move. She felt a cold, hard anger crystallizing in her gut. For 5 years, she thought her battle was against a family of arrogant snobs. Now she realized she was a small gear in a much larger, much darker machine. Her father's failure wasn't just about a stolen company. He must have stumbled onto the Nexus, and that was why he had been destroyed so thoroughly. He hadn't been a victim of greed. He had been a victim of a conspiracy. Suddenly, the power in the mansion flickered and died. The grand chandelier, which had been a beacon of light in the gloomy afternoon, dimmed into a dull orange glow before vanishing into total darkness. The electronic locks on the front door hissed a sound Elena knew meant the system had been overridden. "They're here," Elena whispered. "The police are outside," Maya hissed, clutching her tablet. "They wouldn't dare do anything with the authorities at the gate." "The police are at the gate, Maya, but the Morettis own the ground the gate stands on," Elena replied. She grabbed her laptop and the black ledger, shoving them into her bag. "We need to get to the basement. There's a service tunnel that leads to the old carriage house. It hasn't been used in 30 years, and it's not on the modern security blueprints." As they moved through the darkened hallway, the sound of heavy boots echoed in the foyer. These weren't the clumsy steps of the Sterlings. These were the synchronized, muffled movements of professionals. Elena led Maya through the kitchen, the moonlight reflecting off the stainless steel surfaces. She found the latch for the subfloor, a hidden door disguised as a pantry shelf. They slipped inside just as the kitchen door was kicked off its hinges. The tunnel was damp and smelled of earth and neglect. Elena used the flashlight on her phone, the beam cutting through the thick dust. "Why did Julian never tell me about this?" Maya whispered, her breath hitching in the cramped space. "Because Julian didn't know," Elena said. "He never cared enough about the history of this house to look at the original architectural plans. But I did. When I was his wife, I spent my lonely nights in the city archives, trying to understand the house that felt like a tomb. I found the blueprints for the 19th century renovations. This tunnel was built for the servants to move ice without being seen by the guests. They crawled for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. Finally, they reached a wooden hatch. Elena pushed it open, and they emerged into the carriage house, a dilapidated structure at the far edge of the estate, overgrown with ivy and forgotten by time. Elena peered through a cracked window. Back at the main house, black SUVs had surrounded the building. There were no sirens, no flashing lights. The journalists and the court officers she had left behind were gone. The silence was more terrifying than any noise. They've cleared the scene, Maya said, her voice trembling. Elena, they're going to erase everything. The fraud, the eviction. They'll make it look like we never existed. Not if I leak the Nexus first, Elena said, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. She wasn't using the public internet anymore. She was tapping into a satellite link she had prepared for emergencies. This ledger has the keys to the Moretti's laundering routes. It's the only leverage we have. If I send this to the International Finance Commission, we become too famous to kill. But it takes time to verify, Maya argued. We need to get out of here. My car is parked 3 blocks away. Go, Elena said, handing Maya a backup thumb drive. Take the side road. If I don't make it, make sure this gets to the press. I'm the one they want. I have the ledger. I'm not leaving you. Maya, if we both stay, we both die. If you leave, you're my insurance policy. Go. After a frantic goodbye, Maya disappeared into the woods. Elena sat in the dark carriage house, the glow of the screen, the only light. She watched the upload bar, 45%. Beifenjawusher. Suddenly, the door of the carriage house creaked open. Elena didn't look up. She knew who it was. The scent of expensive cigars and aged leather preceded him. It wasn't a mercenary. It was Julian. But he wasn't the broken man who had walked out the door an hour ago. He was holding a suppressed pistol, and his eyes were cold, vacant, and filled with a terrifying resolve. My mother told me you were always too smart for your own good, Elena, Julian said, his voice steady. She didn't know about the tunnel, but I did. I just waited for her to leave so I could deal with you myself. The Moretti's offered me a deal. I give them the ledger, and I get my life back. I get the company back. All I have to do is get rid of the stain on the family tapestry. Elena looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the man she had loved or the man she had hated. She saw a coward who would sell his soul to stay in a gilded cage. You'd kill your wife for a bank account, Julian? Ex-wife, he corrected, raising the gun. And don't worry, I'll make sure your funeral is the most expensive event the city has ever seen. It's the least I can do for the woman who saved my family's fortune. The upload bar hit 98%. Elena smiled. You're too late, Julian. The world is about to find out who you really work for. Julian's finger tightened on the trigger, his knuckles white in the pale glow of the laptop screen. I don't care about the world, Elena. By the time anyone deciphers those files, I'll be halfway to a private island with a new identity and more money than God. The Moretti's don't leave witnesses, and they don't lose. You were a fool to think you could play in their league. Elena's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. She watched the screen, 99%. You think they'll let you live, Julian? You're the loose end. You're the one who let a low-class girl into the inner sanctum. You're the reason their precious Nexus is at risk. The moment you hand over that ledger, you're useless to them. Shut up, Julian barked, his voice cracking with the first sign of hesitation. You always think you're the smartest person in the room, but you're just a girl from the suburbs who got lucky. Upload complete. Files disseminated to IFC, Interpol, and Global News Network. The laptop emitted a soft, triumphant chime. Elena closed the lid with a deliberate click. It's done, Julian. The stain just became a permanent ink. Every major news outlet in the world just received the Sterling Moretti files. If I die now, it becomes the biggest assassination story of the decade. You won't be sipping cocktails on an island. You'll be the most hunted man on the planet. Julian's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He lunged forward, swinging the pistol toward her temple, but Elena was faster. She had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, not just mentally and financially, but physically. She had taken Krav Maga classes under a false name, channeling her pain into every strike and parry. She ducked under his clumsy swing, drove her elbow into his ribs, and used his own momentum to slam him against the rotting timber wall of the carriage house. The gun clattered to the floor. Julian gasped for air, clutching his side. You bitch! That's honor to you, Julian! Elena hissed. She kicked the gun into the shadows and stood over him. I spent 3 years letting you and your family treat me like a piece of furniture. I listened to your mother tell me I was lucky to eat at your table. I listened to your sisters laugh while they ruined my clothes, but the worst part was listening to you tell me you loved me while you were planning to steal my father's life's work." She picked up the black ledger from the table. "This isn't just paper. This is my father's justice, and it's your death warrant." Suddenly, the sound of a helicopter began to thump in the distance, the heavy, rhythmic beat shaking the old carriage house. Searchlights began to sweep the woods, cutting through the ivy-covered windows like the eyes of an angry god. Julian looked up, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. "That's them, the Morettis. They're here for the ledger. Give it to me, Elena, and I might be able to convince them to let you live in a cage somewhere." Elena looked at the ledger, then at the man who had betrayed her. She realized that as long as this book existed in physical form, she would never be safe. It was a magnet for the worst people on earth. She pulled a lighter from her pocket, the one her father had given her, engraved with the words, "Light the way." "What are you doing?" Julian screamed, scrambling toward her. Elena flicked the wheel. A small, steady flame danced in the darkness, ending the legacy. Julian. She touched the flame to the corner of the ledger, the high-grade paper, saturated with years of ink and secrets, caught instantly. Julian lunged for it, but Elena threw the flaming book into a pile of dry hay and old horse blankets in the corner of the carriage house. Within seconds, the fire roared to life, the orange flames reflecting in the cracked windows. "No! No!" Julian wailed, trying to beat out the flames with his bare hands. The heat was becoming unbearable, the old wood of the structure beginning to moan and pop. "The digital files are already gone, Julian. The physical evidence is turning to ash. There is nothing left to trade," Elena said, backing toward the door. "You have no leverage. You have no family. You have nothing but a burning room." Julian looked at the fire, then at Elena. For a moment, the old Julian was back, the one who was terrified of his own shadow. He realized she was right. Without the ledger, he was a dead man walking. He looked at the door, then back at the flames, paralyzed by indecision. "The helicopter is landing, Julian," Elena called out over the roar of the fire. "If you stay here, you burn. If you go out there, they'll kill you for failing. What's it going to be?" She didn't wait for his answer. She slipped out of the carriage house and disappeared into the dense undergrowth of the forest. Behind her, the carriage house became a funeral pyre, lighting up the night sky. She ran, her lungs burning, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't head for the road where the black SUVs were. She headed for the river, the same river where she used to sit and cry when the Sterling's cruelty became too much to bear. As she reached the muddy bank, she saw a small boat waiting in the shadows. A figure signaled to her with a red light. It was Maya. "Get in! Get in!" Maya whispered urgently. Elena scrambled into the boat, and they pushed off. The electric motor hummed quietly as they drifted downstream, away from the burning estate and the hovering helicopters. Elena looked back one last time. The Sterling mansion was silhouetted against the orange glow of the carriage house fire. It looked like a crumbling castle from a dark fairy tale. "Is it over?" Maya asked, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "The Sterlings are finished," Elena said, staring at her soot-stained hands. "But the Morettis, they don't forget. This was just the opening act, Maya. I didn't just take a house today. I declared war on a shadow. What do we do now?" Elena leaned back, the cool river air hitting her face. "Now, we go to the one place they'd never think to look. We go to my father's old shop. There's one more secret he left for me, and I think it's the only thing that can stop the Morettis for good." The boat glided silently through the dark water, the distant thump of the Moretti helicopters fading into a dull hum. Elena watched the smoke from the carriage house rise like a black ghost against the moon. She felt a strange emptiness. For 5 years, revenge had been her only fuel, the singular North Star guiding her through every lonely night and every grueling hour of forensic accounting. Now that the Sterlings were ashes, the cold reality of the Morettis settled in. She wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. She was a target of global proportions. "Maya, check the news," Elena whispered, her eyes never leaving the receding shoreline. Maya tapped frantically at her tablet, the blue light casting a ghostly glow on her anxious face. "It's everywhere, Elena. The Sterling leak is trending globally." Every major outlet is running the story about the Swiss accounts and the safety violations. But there's something else. A report just came in. A gas leak was reported at the Sterling estate. The authorities are saying the family was evacuated safely, but Julian, they can't find Julian. Elena tightened her grip on the side of the boat. She knew Julian hadn't died in that fire. He was a survivor, a cockroach who thrived in the cracks of other people's lives. If he was missing, it meant he was either in the wind or in the hands of the Morettis. Neither option was good for her. They docked the boat 3 miles downstream at a dilapidated pier behind an abandoned textile mill. Waiting for them was a beat-up silver sedan, the kind of car that disappeared into the background of any city. Elena took the keys from under the wheel well. This was her father's old shop, not the one the Sterlings had seized, but the small, dusty watchmaker's booth he had kept in the basement of a tenement building in the old district. When they arrived at the shop, the air was thick with the scent of oil and aged brass. It was a tiny room, no bigger than a walk-in closet, filled with the rhythmic ticking of 100 broken clocks. Elena walked to the back wall, where a large, ornate grandfather clock stood silent. Her father had always told her, "Time is a gift, Elena, but secrets are the gears that keep it moving." She reached into the clock's casing and turned the gears to a specific time, 3:15, the time of her birth. With a metallic click, a small drawer popped open at the base. Inside was a single brass key and a letter addressed to her. "My dearest Elena," the letter began, her father's shaky handwriting bringing tears to her eyes. "If you are reading this, the Sterlings have shown their true faces. I knew they were coming for the business, but they don't know the real reason they were sent. I found it, Elena. The Nexus isn't just a list of names. It's a digital key to the Moretti's private blockchain, the ledger where they hide the true ownership of the world's central banks. This key is the only thing that can dismantle them. Keep it safe. Use it only when you have nothing left to lose." Elena held the brass key. It wasn't a physical key for a door. It was a cold storage hardware wallet disguised as an antique. "If we use this," Maya whispered, reading over her shoulder, "we aren't just taking down a company. We're collapsing a global financial pillar. The chaos would be unimaginable." "The Morettis built their empire on chaos, Maya," Elena said, her voice hardening. "They used my father's life as a stepping stone. They used me as a distraction. It's time they learned that even the smallest gear can stop the largest machine." Suddenly, the shop's front window shattered. A flashbang grenade skittered across the floor. "Down!" Elena screamed, pulling Maya behind a heavy oak workbench. The explosion was deafening, a white-hot wall of sound and light that left Elena's ears ringing. Through the smoke, she saw 3 figures in tactical gear entering the shop. They weren't moving like police. They moved like hunters. They didn't shout for her to surrender. They just raised their weapons. Elena grabbed a heavy jar of clock oil and hurled it at the nearest figure, then kicked over a rack of heavy metal parts. In the confusion, she and Maya scrambled toward the back exit, a narrow coal chute that led to the alleyway. "Give us the key, Elena," a voice boomed. It was a voice she recognized. Not Julian, and not a stranger. It was the Sterlings' old family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, the man who had notarized the papers that stripped her of her dignity 5 years ago. He stood in the doorway, a silencer-equipped pistol in his hand, his face a mask of professional indifference. "You've done enough damage. Hand over the device, and I can promise you a quick end. The Morettis are not patient people." "You were always their lapdog, weren't you, Henderson?" Elena yelled from the shadows of the alley. "Did you kill my father too?" "Your father was a stubborn man who didn't understand the value of silence," Henderson replied, stepping into the alley. "Don't make the same mistake. You have the Nexus key. Give it to me, and I'll let your friend walk away." Maya looked at Elena, her eyes wide with terror. Elena looked at the brass key in her hand. She knew Henderson was lying. There were no witnesses allowed in this game. "You want the key?" Elena shouted. She held it over a deep, open sewer grate at the end of the alley. "One more step and it's gone. You'll be digging through the city's filth for a decade before you find it." Henderson froze. His orders were clear. The device must be recovered at all costs. Let's be reasonable, Elena. You're a smart woman. Think about your future. My future was stolen 5 years ago in a house filled with people who hated me, Elena said. Today, I'm just making sure no one else has to live in your shadow. Behind Henderson, a dark shape moved. A heavy lead pipe swung through the air, connecting with the back of Henderson's head with a sickening thud. The lawyer collapsed like a sack of stones. Standing over him was a disheveled, bruised, and bloody Julian Sterling. He was breathing hard, his eyes wild. He looked at Elena, then at the gun on the ground, then back at the woman he had once called his wife. "I told you, Elena," he wheezed. "They don't leave witnesses. They tried to kill me at the carriage house. They thought I was in the fire." Elena didn't lower her guard. "Why did you help us, Julian?" "Because," Julian said, his voice trembling, "I realized I'd rather die helping the woman I ruined than live another second as their slave. Now run. There are more of them coming. I'll hold them off." Elena hesitated for only a second. She saw the truth in his eyes, not love, but a desperate, final attempt at redemption. She grabbed Maya's hand and ran toward the end of the alley, leaving Julian Sterling standing in the dark, holding Henderson's gun, waiting for the masters he had served to come for their final payment. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them as Elena and Maya reached the end of the alley. Julian's final stand was short-lived, a frantic exchange of shots that signaled the end of the Sterling bloodline once and for all. Elena didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Every second she spent grieving or questioning was a second the Morettis gained on her. They reached the main road just as a black van swerved toward them, but this time, it wasn't the enemy. The side door slid open, revealing a team of men in tactical gear, but these bore the insignia of the International Finance Commission. "Miss Vance, get in! Now!" the lead agent shouted. Elena pushed Maya inside and scrambled in after her. As the van roared away, Elena collapsed against the seat, her chest heaving. The agent, a stern man with graying hair named Miller, looked at the brass key in her hand with a mixture of awe and terror. "Do you have any idea what you're holding, Elena? We've been tracking the Moretti blockchain for 12 years. We knew it existed, but we could never find the entry point. You've just handed us the skeleton key to the world's shadow economy." "I didn't hand it to you yet," Elena said, her voice cold as ice. She pulled the key back, tucking it into her jacket. "I want immunity, for me and for Maya. And I want the Sterling name officially scrubbed from the records of my father's company. I want his legacy restored, his name on the building, and every penny they stole returned to the charitable trust he started before they destroyed him." Miller sighed, looking out the window at the city lights. "The Morettis are already moving, Elena. They're liquidating assets, erasing servers, and silencing anyone who has ever handled their books. The Sterling leak you started has caused a global panic. If we don't use that key in the next hour, they'll have moved the capital into untraceable offshore accounts, and we'll be back to square one. Then we go to the data center," Elena said. "But I'm the one who enters the code. I need to see it happen. I need to see their balance hit zero." The van sped through the night, heading toward a high-security government facility on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Technicians were working frantically, their screens filled with cascading red lines, the digital footprint of a fleeing empire. Elena was led to a central terminal. She took the brass key out. It felt heavy, not just with metal, but with the weight of all the lives the Morettis had crushed to keep their secrets. She plugged the device into the interface. The screen flickered, and then a command prompt appeared. "Enter Nexus authorization." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her father. She remembered the nights he spent in his shop, his eyes tired but his spirit unbroken, even as the Sterlings were circling like vultures. He had known this day would come. He had built this key not for wealth, but for the truth. She typed in the password, a sequence of numbers that represented the date her father had opened his first shop, combined with the coordinates of the house she had grown up in. Access granted. The screen transformed. A vast, glowing web appeared, showing the interconnected veins of the Moretti wealth. Thousands of accounts, billions of dollars, and the names of the most powerful people on the planet. It was a map of human greed. "Start the transfer," Miller whispered, leaning over her shoulder. "Move it into the Global Recovery Fund. It's over for them." But as Elena's finger hovered over the execute key, a message popped up on the secondary monitor. It was a live video feed. Her heart stopped. It was Beatrice Sterling, sitting in a stark, white room, her face bruised and her eyes wide with terror. Beside her stood a man in a perfectly tailored Italian suit, a man whose face was never seen in the press, but whose name was spoken in hushed tones in every boardroom in Europe: Lorenzo Moretti. "Miss Vance." Lorenzo's voice was smooth, like silk over a blade. "I must congratulate you. You are the first person in 3 generations to find the back door to my family's vault. But I believe you are laboring under the delusion that this is a movie where the hero wins. This is reality, and in reality, I still have something you might want." He leaned down and whispered something into Beatrice's ear. The woman who had treated Elena like trash, who had mocked her poverty and engineered her downfall, let out a pathetic, stifled sob. "I don't care about Beatrice," Elena said into the microphone, though her hand trembled. "She's a criminal. She deserves whatever you do to her." "Perhaps," Lorenzo smiled, "but what about the children? The Sterling Group didn't just manage banks, Elena. They managed the orphanages your father funded. The accounts for those centers are tied to this blockchain. If you execute that command, the recovery fund gets the money, yes, but the orphanages lose their operating capital instantly. 500 children will be on the street by morning because of your justice." Elena looked at Miller. "Is he lying?" Miller's face was grim as he checked his own monitor. "He's not. He's tied the social welfare accounts to the primary liquidation trigger. It's a dead man's switch. If we take the Morettis down, we take the innocent with them." Elena looked back at the screen. Lorenzo Moretti was watching her, his expression one of bored confidence. He knew he had her. He knew she wasn't a monster like him. "You have 10 minutes, Elena," Lorenzo said. "Disconnect the key, and I will release the Sterling matriarch and decouple the welfare accounts. We will leave you in peace. You can keep the house. You can keep your father's name. Just walk away." Elena stared at the glowing web. The Sterlings had been a nightmare, but the Morettis were the darkness itself. If she walked away now, she would be safe, but the world would remain in their grip. If she pushed the button, she would be a savior to the global economy, but a villain to the children her father loved. She looked at the brass key, then at the execute button. Her mind raced through every calculation, every forensic trick she had learned. She realized Lorenzo had made one mistake. He assumed she was looking for a way to save everyone. But Elena Vance had learned a long time ago that in a war of betrayal, you have to be willing to lose something to win everything. Elena's eyes darted across the lines of code. Lorenzo Moretti was a master of psychological warfare, but he had underestimated the very thing that made Elena a world-class forensic accountant: her ability to find the ghost in the machine. She didn't look at the primary accounts Lorenzo was pointing to. Instead, she looked at the subdirectories, the deep, dark corners of the blockchain, where the Sterling family's personal greed had created a flaw. "You're right, Lorenzo," Elena said, her voice echoing in the silent data center. "I'm not a monster, but Beatrice is." She began typing with a ferocity that made the technicians around her pause. "Miller, look at the Sterling Moretti joint venture account from 7 years ago. Beatrice didn't just want to manage the orphanages. She wanted to skim from them. She set up a secret buffer account to hide the interest she was stealing. That buffer account is the only one not tied to the dead man's switch. It's the link that anchors the entire chain." "What are you doing?" Lorenzo's voice lost its smooth edge, replaced by a sharp, jagged tone of suspicion. "I'm not executing the global transfer," Elena replied, a cold smile touching her lips. "I'm executing a force reverse on Beatrice's secret skimming account. Since that account was built on a foundation of theft from the very welfare funds you're threatening, the blockchain sees it as a system error. If I collapse that specific node, the entire Moretti network enters an automatic audit mode to prevent data corruption. Elena, stop! Beatrice screamed from the monitor, her face contorted in fear as she realized her own greed was the trapdoor. It's too late, Beatrice. You wanted to be a Sterling? Well, this is how the Sterlings end, Elena said, and she slammed her palm onto the Enter key. The screens in the data center turned a blinding white. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, a low rumble seemed to vibrate through the floor as the massive servers began to work at a speed they were never designed for. On Lorenzo's video feed, the lights in his white room began to strobe. The confidence drained from his face as he looked at a tablet in his hand. "You've frozen the assets," Lorenzo whispered, his voice trembling with a rage so deep it was barely audible. "You didn't take them, you locked them. Nobody can touch that money now. Not the IFC, not the orphans, and not me." "Exactly," Elena said, standing up from the terminal. "The money is in a digital limbo. It will take the world's best cryptographers 20 years to untangle that knot. The orphans will be fine, Lorenzo, because the IFC has enough evidence now to freeze your physical assets and provide interim funding. But you're broke. In the eyes of your associates and your creditors, you are now the man who lost the vault key." Lorenzo Moretti stood up, his tailored suit suddenly looking like a shroud. He didn't say another word. He simply turned off the feed. The screen went black. "We need to move you to a safe house," Miller said, grabbing Elena's arm. "The Morettis might be broke, but they still have friends who work for free when it comes to revenge." "No," Elena said, shaking him off. "I'm done running. I'm going back to where this started. I have one last thing to deliver." 3 days later, the rain was falling again, a soft, cleansing drizzle that washed the soot from the streets of the city. Elena stood in front of the Sterling mansion. The gates were open. The house was no longer a fortress. It was a crime scene. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind, and the grand windows were dark. She walked up the steps, her heels clicking on the stone. She wasn't carrying a suitcase this time. She was carrying a single, legal-sized envelope. Inside the foyer, the air was cold and smelled of damp plaster. The furniture was gone, just as she had ordered. The marble floors were scratched and dull. In the center of the room stood Beatrice Sterling. She had been released by the Morettis, probably because killing her was too much effort for a woman who no longer had any value. She looked like a ghost, her hair unkempt, wearing a tattered coat she must have found in a donation bin. "Are you happy now?" Beatrice rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves. "Julian is dead. Clara and Sophia are in a state-run psychiatric ward. I'm living in a shelter. You've destroyed us." Elena looked at the woman who had once called her trash. She felt no joy. She felt no triumph. She only felt a profound sense of closure. "I didn't destroy you, Beatrice. I just stopped holding up the lies you built your life on. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that other people's lives were just currency for your comfort." Elena handed her the envelope. "What is this?" Beatrice asked, her hands shaking as she opened it. "It's the deed to your father's original cottage in the countryside," Elena said. "It's the only asset the court didn't seize because it was in my name, a gift Julian gave me during our first year to prove how generous he was. It's small, it's isolated, and it's all you have left. Go there. Live out the rest of your days in the silence you forced on everyone else." Beatrice looked at the paper, then at Elena. For a moment it looked like she might scream, might lunge, might beg. But then the last of the Sterling pride simply evaporated. She turned and walked toward the door, her shoulders slumped, a broken woman disappearing into the gray afternoon. Elena stood alone in the empty mansion. She walked to the library, the room where she had once been told she didn't belong. She sat on the floor, leaning her head against the cold mahogany shelving. She pulled out her phone and looked at a photo of her father. "It's over, Dad," she whispered. "The clocks are all ticking again." But as she sat there, she heard a sound from the foyer, a slow, rhythmic clapping. She stood up, her heart leaping into her throat. Was it Lorenzo? A mercenary? A man stepped out of the shadows. He was dressed in a simple navy suit, his face kind but his eyes sharp with intelligence. Elena didn't recognize him, but she recognized the pin on his lapel, the same crest that was on her father's antique watch. "You did well, Elena," the man said. "Your father would have been proud. But I'm afraid the Nexuses wasn't the end of the story. It was just the entrance exam." Elena stood tall, her eyes narrowing as she studied the man. "An entrance exam? I've spent 5 years in hell, and I just dismantled a global shadow network. I'm not looking for a new job." The man smiled thinly, stepping further into the dim light of the library. "My name is Arthur. I was your father's silent partner, not in watchmaking, but in the oversight of the very system you just froze. Your father knew that the Morettis were just one head of the Hydra. By freezing the Nexus, you haven't just stopped the money. You've signaled to the other families that the position of gatekeeper is vacant. You've inherited more than a name and a house, Elena. You've inherited a responsibility to ensure that wealth never becomes a weapon again." Elena looked around the empty, hollow mansion. She realized then that her journey wasn't about returning to the past, it was about defining the future. She had started as a victim of a family's cruelty, evolved into an instrument of vengeance, and now she was being asked to be a guardian. She took a deep breath, the scent of the rain-dampened earth filling her lungs. "If I do this," she said firmly, "I do it my way. No more secrets, no more shadows. We rebuild the foundation on the truth." Arthur nodded respectfully. "That is exactly why your father chose you." The Sterlings saw a girl they could crush. He saw a woman who could lead. As the two of them walked out of the Sterling mansion for the last time, Elena didn't look back at the wreckage. She looked forward, toward the city skyline where the lights were beginning to flicker on, one by one. The betrayal was a memory. The greed was a lesson. And the woman who had been cast out at 30 was now the most powerful person in the room. The game had changed, but Elena Vance was finally the one writing the rules. Thank you for joining us for this intense journey of betrayal and ultimate redemption. This story reminds us that no matter how dark the night gets, the truth has a way of finding the light. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of the Sterling Empire, please show your support for the channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another gripping story here on Dr. Harmony. Your support helps us bring more of these justice-driven tales to life. Leave a comment below letting us know what you thought of Elena's final choice. Would you have taken the deal? We love hearing your theories. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay strong, and remember, the truth always wins in the end.